everyone! I hope you're ready for another adventure, because today Wayne continues to read Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Always remember that as we go through these stories and read these adventures, all you have to do is press the CC button to be able to follow along with the words. I wonder who is going to join us for today's adventure. Madam Owl, looks like she's back. Are you ready to jump into the story, Madam Owl? Looks like Madam Owl is all set. Hope you are too. Let's begin. Chapter 7, The Sorting Hat. The door swung open at once. A tall, black-haired witch in emerald green robes stood there. She had a very stern face, and Harry's first thought was that she was not someone to cross. "The first years, Professor McGonagall," said Hagrid. "Thank you, Hagrid. I will take them from here." She pulled the door wide. The entrance hall was so big, you could fit the whole of the Dursleys' house in it. The stone walls were lit with flaming torches like the ones in Gringotts. The ceiling was too high to make out, and a magnificent marble staircase facing them led them to the upper floors. They followed Professor McGonagall across the flagstone floor. Harry could hear the drone of hundreds of voices from a doorway to the right. The rest of the school must already be here. But Professor McGonagall showed the first years into a small empty chamber of the hall. They crowded in, standing rather closer together than they usually would have done, peering about nervously. "Welcome to Hogwarts," said Professor McGonagall. "The start of term banquet will begin shortly, but before you take your seats in the Great Hall, you will be sorted into your houses. The sorting is a very important ceremony because while you are here, your house will be something like your family within Hogwarts. You will have classes with the rest of your house, sleep in your house dormitory, and spend free time in your house common room. The 4 houses are called Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin. Each house has its own noble history, and each has produced outstanding witches and wizards. While you are at Hogwarts, your triumphs earn your house points, and while any rule breaking will lose house points. At the end of the year, the house with the most points is awarded the House Cup, a great honor. I hope each of you will be a credit to whichever house becomes yours. The sorting ceremony will take place in a few minutes in front of the rest of the school. I suggest you all smarten yourselves as much as you can while you're waiting." Her eyes lingered for a moment on Neville's cloak, which was fastened under his left ear, and Ron's smudged nose. Harry nervously flattened his hair. "I shall return when you are ready," said Professor McGonagall. "Please wait quietly." She left the chamber. Harry swallowed. "How exactly do they sort us in houses?" he asked Ron. "Some sort of test, I think. Fred says it hurt a lot, but I think he was joking." Harry's heart gave a horrible jolt. A test? In front of the whole school? But he didn't know any magic yet. What on earth would he do? He hadn't expected something like this the moment they arrived. He looked around anxiously and saw that everyone else looked terrified too. No one was talking much except for Hermione Granger, who was whispering very fast about all the spells she learned and wondered which one she'd need. Harry tried hard not to listen to her. He'd never been more nervous, never. Not even when he had to take a school report home to the Dursleys saying that he somehow turned the teacher's wig blue. He kept his eyes fixed on the door. Any second now, Professor McGonagall would show up and lead him to his doom. Then something happened that made him jump about a foot in the air. Several people behind him screamed. "What the?" he gasped. So did the people around him. About 20 ghosts had just screamed through the back wall. Pearly white and slightly transparent, they glided across the room talking to one another and hardly glancing at the first years. They seemed to be arguing. What looked like a fat little monk was saying, "Forgive and forget, I say. We ought to give him a second chance." "My dear Friar, we haven't given Peeves all the chances he deserves. He gives us a bad name, you know. He's not really even a ghost. I say, What are you all doing here? A ghost wearing a ruffed and tights was suddenly noticed the first years. Nobody answered. New students, said the fat friar, smiling all around me. About to be sorted, I suppose. A few nodded mutely. Hopefully, to see you in Hufflepuff, said the friar. My old house, you know. Move along now, said a sharp voice. The sorting ceremony is about to start. Professor McGonagall had returned. One by one, the ghosts floated away through the opposite wall. Now form a line, Professor McGonagall told the first years, and follow me. Feeling oddly as though his legs had turned to lead, Harry got into line behind the boy with sandy hair, with Ron behind him, and they walked out of the chamber, across the hall, and through a pair of double doors into the great hall. Harry had never imagined such a strange and splendid place. It was lit by thousands and thousands of candles that were floating in mid-air over 4 long tables, where the rest of the students were sitting. These tables were laid with glittering golden plates and goblets. At the top of the hall was another long table where the teachers were sitting. Professor McGonagall led the first years up there, so they came to a halt in a line facing the other students with teachers behind them. The hundreds of faces staring at them looked like pale lanterns in flickering candlelight. Dotted here and there among the students, the ghost shone misty silver, mainly to avoid all the staring eyes. Harry looked upwards and saw a velvety black ceiling dotted with stars. He heard Hermione whisper, "It's bewitched to look like the night sky outside. I read about it in Hogwarts, a history." It was hard to believe that there was a ceiling there at all, and that the great hall didn't seem open to the heavens. Harry quickly looked down again as Professor McGonagall silently placed a 4-legged stool in front of the first years. On top of the stool, she put a pointed wizard's hat. This hat was patched and frayed and extremely dirty. Aunt Petunia wouldn't have let it in her house. Maybe they had to try to get a rabbit out of it, Harry thought wildly. That seemed the sort of thing. Noticing that everyone in the hall was now staring at the hat, he stared at it too. For a few seconds, there was complete silence. Then the hat twitched. A rip near the brim opened like a mouth, and the hat began to sing. Oh, you may not think I'm pretty, but don't judge on what you see. I'll eat myself if I can find a hat smarter than me. You can keep your bowlers black, your top hat sleek and tall, for I'm the Hogwarts Sorting Hat, and I can cap them all. There's nothing hidden in your head the Sorting Hat can't see, so try me on and I will tell where you ought to be. You might belong to Gryffindor, where dwell the brave at heart. Their daring nerve and chivalry set Gryffindors apart. You might belong to Hufflepuff, where they are just and loyal. Those patient Hufflepuffs are true and unafraid of toil. Or yet, in wise old Ravenclaw, if you've of ready mind, where those of wit and learning will always find their kind. Or perhaps you're in Slytherin. You'll make your real friends. Those cunning folks use any means to achieve their ends. So put me on, don't be afraid, and don't get in a flap. You're in safe hands, though I have none, for I'm a thinking cap. The whole hall burst into applause as the hat finished its song. It bowed to each of the 4 tables, and then became quite still again. So we've just got to try on the hat, Ron said to Harry. I'll kill Fred. He was going on about wrestling a troll. Harry smiled weakly. Yes, trying on that hat was a lot better than having to do a spell, but he wished they could have tried it on without everyone watching. The hat seemed to be asking rather a lot. Harry didn't feel brave or quick-witted or any of it at the moment. If only the hat had mentioned a house for people who felt a bit queasy, that would have been the one for him. Professor McGonagall stepped forward holding a roll of parchment. When I call your name, you will put on the hat and sit on the chair to be sorted, she said. Abbott. Hannah. A pink-faced girl with blonde pigtails stumbled out of line, put on the hat, which fell right down over her ears, and the hat sat down a moment's pause. Hufflepuff! Shouted the hat. The table on the right cheered and clapped as Hannah went to sat down at the Hufflepuff table. Harry saw the ghost of the fat friar waving merrily at Hannah. Bones, Susan. Hufflepuff, shouted the hat again, and Susan scuttled off to sit next to Hannah. Boot, Terry. Ravenclaw. The table second from the left clapped. Several Ravenclaws stood up to shake hands with Terry as he joined them. Brocklehurst, Mandy, went to Ravenclaw too, but Brown Lavender became the first Gryffindor, and the table on the far left exploded with cheers. Harry could see Ron's twin brother catcalling. Bulstrode, Millicent, then became a Slytherin. Perhaps it was Harry's imagination. After all, he'd heard about the Slytherins, but he thought they looked like an unpleasant lot. He was starting to feel definitely sick now. He remembered being picked for teams during gym at his school. He had always been the last to be chosen. Not because he was no good, but because no one wanted Dursley to think they liked him. Finch, Fletchley, Justin. Hufflepuff. Sometimes Harry noticed the hat shouted out the house at once, but at others it took a little while to decide. Finnegan, Seamus, a sandy-haired boy next to Harry in line, sat on the stool for almost a whole minute before the hat declared him a Gryffindor. Granger, Hermione. Hermione almost ran to the stool and jammed the hat eagerly on her head. Gryffindor, the hat shouted. Ron groaned. A horrible thought struck Harry, as horrible thoughts always do when you're nervous. What if he wasn't chosen at all? What if he just sat there with the hat over his eyes for ages until Professor McGonagall jerked it off his head and said that there was obviously been a mistake and he'd have to get back on the train? When Neville Longbottom, the boy who kept losing his toad, was called, he fell over on his way to the stool. The hat took a long time to decide with Neville. Finally it shouted, Gryffindor! Neville ran off, still wearing it. And had to jog back amid gales of laughter to give it to McDougal Morag. Malfoy swathered forward when his name was called and got his wish at once. The hat had barely touched his head when it screamed, Slytherin. Malfoy went to join his friends Crabbe and Goyle, looking pleased with himself. There weren't many people left now. Moon, Knott, Parkinson, then a pair of twin girls, Patil and Patil, then Perks, Sally Ann, and then at last, Potter, Harry. The last thing Potter saw before the hat was dropped over his eyes was a handful of people craning to get a good look at him. Next second, he was looking at the inside of the black hat. He waited. Said a small voice in his ear. Difficult, very difficult. Plenty of courage, I see. Not a bad mind either. There's talent, oh my goodness, yes. And there's a thirst to prove yourself. Now that's interesting. So where shall I put you? Harry gripped the edge of his skull and thought, not Slytherin, not Slytherin. Not Slytherin, eh? Said the small voice. Are you sure? You could be great, you know. It's all here in your head. And Slytherin will help you on that way to greatness. No doubt about that, no. Well then, if you're sure, better be Gryffindor! Harry heard the hat shout the last word to the hall. He took off the hat and walked shakily toward the Gryffindor table. He was so relieved to have been chosen, but not put in Slytherin. He hardly noticed that he was getting the loudest cheers yet. Percy, the prefect, got up and shook his hand vigorously, while Weasley twins was like, We got Potter! We got Potter! Harry sat down opposite the ghost in the ruff he'd seen earlier. The ghost patted his arm, giving Harry a sudden, horrible feeling he'd just plunged into a bucket of ice-cold water. He could see the high table properly now. At the end nearest him sat Hagrid, who caught his eye and gave him a thumbs up. Harry grinned back. In the center of the high table, in a large golden chair, sat Albus Dumbledore. Harry recognized him at once from the card he'd gotten in the Chocolate Frog on the train. Dumbledore's silver hair was the only thing in the whole hall that shone as brightly as the ghost's. Harry spotted Professor Quirrell, too, the nervous young man from the Leaky Cauldron. He was looking very peculiar at a large purple turban. And now then, there were only 3 people left to be sorted. Thomas Dean, a black boy, even taller than Ron, joined Harry at the Gryffindor table. Turpin Lisa became a Ravenclaw, and then it was Ron's turn. He was pale green now. Harry crossed his fingers on the table, and a second later the hat sorted, Gryffindor! Harry clapped loudly with the rest as Ron collapsed into the chair next to him. Well done, Ron. Excellent, said Percy pompously across Harriet, as Zemblio Blaise was placed in Slytherin. Professor McGonagall rolled up her scroll and took the sorting hat away. Harry looked down at his empty gold plate. He had just realized how hungry he was. The pumpkin pasties seemed ages ago. Albus Dumbledore had gotten to his feet. He was beaming at the students, his arms open wide as if nothing could have pleased him more than to see them all there. Welcome, he said. Welcome to the new year at Hogwarts. Before we begin our banquet, I would like to say a few words. And here they are. Nitwit, blubber, oddment, tweak. Thank you. He sat back down. Everyone clapped and cheered. Harry didn't know whether to laugh or not. Is he a bit mad? He asked Percy uncertainly. Mad, said Percy airily. He's a genius. Best wizard in the world. But he is a bit mad, yes. Potatoes, Harry? Harry's mouth fell open. The dishes in front of him were now piled with food. He had never seen so many things he'd like to eat on a table. Roast beef, roast chicken, pork chops and lamb chops, sausages, bacon and steak, boiled potatoes, roast potatoes, fries, Yorkshire pudding, peas, carrots, gravy, ketchup, and for some strange reason, peppermint humbugs? The Dursleys had never exactly starved Harry, but he'd never been allowed to eat as much as he liked. Dudley had always taken anything that Harry really wanted, even if it made him sick. Harry piled his plate with a bit of everything except for the peppermints and began to eat. It was all delicious. That does look good, said the ghost in the rough sadly, watching Harry cup his steak. Can't you? I haven't eaten in nearly 400 years, said the ghost. I don't need to, of course, but one does miss it. I don't think I've introduced myself. Sir Nicholas de Mimsy Portigun, at your service, resident ghost of Gryffindor Tower. I know who you are, said Ron suddenly. My brothers told me about you. You're nearly headless, Nick. I would prefer you call me Sir Nicholas de Mimsy, said the ghost began stiffly. But sandy-haired Seamus Finnegan interrupted. Nearly headless? How can you be nearly headless? Sir Nicholas looked extremely miffed, as if a little chat wasn't going to go the way he wanted. Like this, he said irritably. He seized his left ear and pulled. His head swung a little off his neck and fell onto his shoulders as if it was on a hinge. Ugh. Someone had obviously tried to behead him, but not done it properly. Looking pleased at the stunned looks on their faces, nearly headless Nick flipped his head back onto his neck, coughed and said, So, new Gryffindors, I hope you're going to help us win the house championship this year. Gryffindors have never gone so long without winning. Slytherins have got the club 6 years in a row. The Bloody Baron's becoming almost unbearable. He's a Slytherin ghost. Harry looked at the Slytherin table and saw a horrible ghost sitting there, with blank staring eyes, a gaunt face, and robes stained with silver blood. He was right next to Malfoy, who, Harry was pleased to see, didn't look so pleased with the seating arrangements. How did he get so covered in blood? Asked Seamus with interest. I've never asked, said nearly headless Nick delicately. When everyone had eaten as much as they could, the remains of the food faded from the plates, leaving them sparkly clean, as before. A moment later, the desserts appeared. Blocks of ice cream in every flavor you could think of. Apple pies, treacle tarts, chocolate eclairs, jam donuts, trice, strawberries, jello, rice pudding. As Harry helped himself to a trickle tart, the talk turned to their families. I'm half and half, said Seamus. Me dad's a muggle. Mom didn't tell him she was a witch till after they were married. Bit of a nasty shock for him. The others laughed. What about you, Neville, said Ron. My gram brought me up, and she's a witch, said Neville. But my family thought I was a muggle for ages. My great-uncle Agni kept trying to catch me off my guard and force some magic out of me. But he pushed me off the end of a black hole pier once. I nearly drowned. But nothing happened until I was 8. Great-uncle Agni came around for dinner, and he was hanging me out of one of the upstairs windows by my ankle when my great-aunt Ed offered him a margarine and he accidentally let go. But I bounced all the way down the garden and into the road. They were all really pleased. Gran was crying. She was so happy. And you shouldn't have seen their faces when I got here. They thought I might not be magic enough to come, you see. Great Uncle Algie was so pleased he brought me my toad. On Harry's other side, Percy Weasley and Hermione were talking about lessons. I do hope they start right away. There's so much to learn. I'm particularly interested in transfiguration. You know, turning something into something else, of course. It's supposed to be very difficult. You'll be starting small, just matches onto needles and that sort of thing. Harry, who was starting to feel warm and sleepy, looked up at the high table again. Hagrid was drinking deeply from his goblet. Professor McGonagall was talking to Professor Dumbledore. Professor Quirrell, in his absurd turban, was talking to a teacher with greasy black hair, a hooked nose, and shallow skin. It happened very suddenly. The hooked teacher looked past Quirrell's turban straight into Harry's eyes, and a sharp, hot pain shot across Harry's forehead. Ouch! He clasped his hand to his head. What is it? Asked Percy. Nothing. The pain was gone as quickly as it come. Harder to shake off was the feeling Harry had gotten from the teacher's look, a feeling that he didn't like Harry at all. Who's that teacher talking to Professor Quirrell? He asked Percy. Oh, you know Quirrell already, do you? No wonder he's looking so nervous. That's Professor Snape. He teaches potions, but he doesn't want to. Everyone knows he's after Quirrell's job. Knows an awful lot about the dark arts, Snape. Harry watched Snape for a while, but Snape didn't look at him again. At last the desserts too disappeared, and Dumbledore got to his feet. The hall fell silent. Ahem. Just a few more words now that we have all fed and watered. I have a few start of term notices to give you. First, you should note that the forest on the grounds is forbidden to all pupils, and a few of our older students would do well to remember that as well. Dumbledore's twinkly eyes flashed in the direction of the Weasley twins. I have been asked by Mr. Fitch, the caretaker, to remind you all that no magic should be used between classes in corridors. Quidditch trials will be held the second week of the term. Anyone interested in playing for their house should contact Madam Hooch. And finally, I must tell you that this year, the third floor corridor on the right-hand side is out of bounds to anyone who does not wish to die a very painful death. Harry laughed, but he was the only one who did. He's not serious, he muttered to Percy. He must be, said Percy, frowning at Dumbledore. It's odd because he usually gives us a reason why we're not allowed to go somewhere. The forest is full of dangerous beasts, everyone knows that. I do think he would have told the prefects at least. And now, before we go to bed, let us sing the school song, cried Dumbledore. Harry noticed that the other teachers' smiles had become rather fixed. Dumbledore gave his wand a little flick as he was trying to get the fly off the end, and a golden ribbon flew out of it, which rose high above the tables and twisted itself snake-like into words. Everyone pick your favorite tune, said Dumbledore, and off we go. And the school bellowed, Hogwarts, Hogwarts, Hoggy Warty Hogwarts, teach us something please, whether we be old and bald, or young with scabby knees. Our heads could do with filling, with some interesting stuff, for now they're bare and full of air, dead flies and bits of fluff. So teach us things worth knowing, bring back what we forgot. Just do our best, we'll do the rest, and learn until our brains all rot. Everybody finishing the song had different times. At last, the only Weasley twins were left singing along to a few slow funeral march. Dumbledore conducted their last few lines with his wand, and when they had finished, he was one of those who clapped the loudest. Ah, music, he said, wiping his eyes. A magic beyond all we do here. And now, bedtime. Off you trot. The Gryffindor's first years followed Percy through the chattering crowds, out of the great hall and up the marble staircase. Harry's legs were like lead again, only because he was so tired and full of food. He was so sleepy. He was too sleepy even to be surprised that the people in the porches of the corridors whispered and pointed as they passed, or that twice Percy led them through doorways hidden behind sliding panels and hiding tapestries. They climbed staircases, yawning and dragging their feet. Harry was just wondering how much longer they would go when they came to a sudden halt. A bundle of walking sticks was floating in the air in mid-air ahead of them, and as Percy took a step toward them, they started throwing themselves at him. "Peeves!" Percy whispered to the first years. "A poltergeist." He raised his voice. "Peeves, show yourself." A loud, rude sound like the air being let out of a balloon answered. "Do you want me to go to the Bloody Baron?" There was a pop, and a little man with wicked dark eyes and a wide mouth appeared, floating cross-legged in the air, crutching the walking stick. "Oh," he said with an evil cackle. "Ickle firsties, what fun." He swooped suddenly at them. They all ducked. "Go away, Peeves, or the Baron will hear of this." "I mean it," barked Percy. Peeves stuck out his tongue and vanished, dropping the walking sticks on Neville's head, when they heard him zooming, rattling coats of armor as he passed. "You want to watch out for Peeves," said Percy, as they sat off again. "The Bloody Baron's the only one who can control him. He won't listen to us prefects. Here we are." At the end of the long corridor hung a portrait of a very fat woman in a pink silk dress. "Password," she said. "Caput Draconis," said Percy, and the portrait swung forward to reveal a round hole in the wall. They all scrambled through it. Neville needed a leg up, and found themselves in Gryffindor Common Room, a cozy round room full of squashy armchairs. Percy directed the girls through one door to their dormitory, and the boys through another. At the top of a spiral staircase, they were obviously in one of the towers. They found their beds at last. 5 four-posters hung with deep red and velvet curtains. Their trunks had already been brought up, and too tired to talk, they put on their pajamas and fell into bed. "Great food, isn't it?" Ron muttered to Harry through the hangers. "Get off, Scabbard. He's chewing my sheets." Harry was going to ask Ron if he'd had any of the trickle tart, but he fell asleep almost at once. Perhaps Harry had eaten a bit too much, because a very strange dream. He was wearing Professor Quirrell's turban, which kept talking to him, telling him he must transfer to Slytherin at once, because that was his destiny. Harry told the turban he didn't want to be in Slytherin. It got heavier and heavier. He tried to pull it off, but it tightened painfully. There was Malfoy laughing at him as he struggled with it. Then Malfoy turned into the hook-nosed teacher Snape, whose laugh became cold and high. There was a burst of green light, and Harry woke sweating and shaking. He rolled over and fell asleep again, and when he awoke the next day, he didn't remember the dream at all. Oh wow, that is very interesting and a very good way to end today's story. Are you excited about the Sorting Hat and how everyone got into their new houses, Madam Owl? I thought you would like that too. We'll see you on the next one. And we'll see you on the next one here with Wayne Reads. Thank you for joining us for another adventure here with Harry Potter. We can't wait to see you on the next time. Bye-bye.